The mess hall of the Covenant's Edge hummed with its usual cacophony of languages, laughter, and the clatter of utensils against metal trays. Jackson Moore sat alone in the corner booth, his eyes fixed on the data pad in front of him, though he wasn't really reading anything. It was a shield, a barrier between himself and the world, or more specifically, between himself and her. Orla. Even thinking her name made his chest tighten. Across the vast dining area, surrounded by her retinue of Valerian nobles and diplomats, sat Princess Orleneth Sway Velara. Her skin shimmered with that characteristic iridescent quality of her people, shifting between deep purples and soft silvers depending on the light. Her four eyes, two primary, two secondary, scanned the room with an alertness that seemed almost predatory, though Jackson knew better. He'd seen her kindness, her curiosity, her genuine desire to understand the humans who had recently joined the Galactic Coalition. That was precisely the problem. "You're doing it again," came a voice beside him. Jackson didn't need to look up to know it was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, his closest friend aboard the human delegation ship. "Doing what?" Jackson muttered, still pretending to read. "The thing where you pretend she doesn't exist while simultaneously tracking her every movement." Sarah slid into the seat across from him, her own tray of synthetic protein and vegetables landing with a thud. "It's been 3 weeks, Jack. You can't avoid her forever." "Watch me." Sarah sighed, stabbing at her food with unnecessary force. "You know, for a xenobiologist, you're remarkably bad at interacting with alien species." "I interact just fine with alien species," Jackson countered. "I've cataloged 17 different ecosystems, conducted peaceful first contact with the Corthani miners, and you've been running away from a perfectly nice alien princess who just wants to be your friend." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What happened, Jack? You two were inseparable during the first month of the exchange program. Then suddenly, radio silence." Jackson's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what had happened. It had been during the cultural exchange dinner 4 weeks ago. The humans had been invited to share their customs, their food, their stories. Jackson had found himself seated next to Orla, and for hours they had talked, really talked, about everything from Earth's biodiversity to Valerian philosophy. She had laughed at his jokes, asked insightful questions about human emotions, and somewhere in the middle of explaining why humans found sunsets beautiful, he had realized something terrifying. He was falling for her. Not just attracted to her alien beauty, though she was undeniably stunning by any species standards. No, it was deeper than that. He admired her intellect, her compassion, the way she saw the universe with wonder rather than the jaded cynicism so common among the Coalition's elite. And when she had touched his hand, just a brief, innocent contact while reaching for a shared dish, he had felt a connection that transcended species boundaries. That was when he had started avoiding her. Because Jackson Moore, xenobiologist and proud representative of humanity, was a coward. "It's complicated," he finally said. "It's really not," Sarah replied. "You like her, she clearly likes you. The only thing making it complicated is you." Before Jackson could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of Valerian guards had entered, their crystalline armor catching the overhead lights. Behind them walked Ambassador Kelvorn, Orla's chief advisor, his expression grave. "Representative Moore," Kelvorn's voice carried across the mess hall with the resonance typical of his species. "Princess Orleneth requests your immediate presence in the diplomatic suite." The entire room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes, human, Valerian, and a dozen other species, turned to stare at Jackson. "Tell the princess I'm currently occupied with." It was not a request, Representative Moore. Kelvorn's 4 eyes narrowed. "The princess has been unwell. She specifically asked for you." Unwell? Jackson felt a spike of concern despite himself. Valerians rarely suffered from illness. Their immune systems were far superior to humans. If Orla was sick, it had to be serious. Sarah kicked him under the table. "Go," she mouthed. Jackson stood, his appetite completely gone. "Lead the way." The diplomatic suite was located in the upper decks of the ship, where the artificial gravity was lighter, and the walls were decorated with holographic displays of Valerian homeworlds. Jackson had been here before, during those first few weeks when he and Orla had spent hours discussing their respective cultures. The guard stopped at the entrance, and Kelvorn gestured for Jackson to enter alone. "Should I be concerned?" Jackson asked. "That depends entirely on you, human," Kelvorn replied cryptically before activating the door. Jackson stepped inside. The suite was dimly lit, the holographic displays showing a gentle twilight over a Valerian ocean. Orla sat on a low bench near the viewport, her back to the door. Her usual elegant posture was gone. Instead, she seemed almost collapsed in on herself. "Orla," Jackson's voice was soft. She didn't turn around. "You came." "Of course I came. Kelvorn said you were sick." "I am not ill." Her voice was tight, controlled, not in the way you understand illness. Jackson moved closer slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "Then what's wrong?" Finally, she turned to face him, and Jackson's breath caught in his throat. Valerian tears were nothing like human tears. They crystallized as they fell, creating tiny prisms that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns. Orla's face was streaked with them, and more continued to form in her 4 eyes. "You have been avoiding me," she said, and her voice cracked. "For 23 of your Earth days, you have refused to speak with me, to acknowledge my presence, to even look in my direction, and I do not understand why." Jackson felt like he'd been punched in the gut. "Orla, do you know what it means in Valerian culture when someone you have bonded with suddenly refuses all contact?" She stood, and Jackson could see her hands trembling. "It means you have found them unworthy. It means you consider them beneath your notice. It means—" her voice broke completely. "It means I have done something so terrible that I am not even worth an explanation." "No," Jackson stepped forward without thinking, his hands reaching for hers before he could stop himself. "No, Orla, you haven't done anything wrong. You're not unworthy. He struggled to find the words. "You're incredible." She stared at him, confusion replacing some of the hurt in her expression. "Then why have you abandoned our friendship?" Jackson's hands were still holding hers, and he realized he didn't want to let go. "Because I'm afraid," he admitted. "Of what?" "Of this." He gestured between them. "Of what I feel when I'm around you. Of the fact that somewhere along the way friendship stopped being enough." He took a shaky breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Orla, and that terrifies me." The crystalline tears on her face caught the light as she processed his words. Valerians had no exact equivalent for the human concept of romantic love, but the Coalition's translation protocols did their best. "You care for me, in the manner of human-bonded pairs." "Yes." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "And I know that's probably inappropriate and complicated and maybe even offensive to your culture. I know you're a princess and I'm just a scientist. I know we're from different worlds, different species. I know all the reasons why this is impossible. That's why I stayed away. I thought if I just kept my distance, these feelings would fade." "Did they?" she asked quietly. "Not even a little." Orla was quiet for a long moment, and Jackson braced himself for rejection, for disgust, for any number of reasonable reactions to a human confessing romantic feelings for an alien princess. Instead, she started to laugh. It was a musical sound, tinged with relief, and something else Jackson couldn't quite identify. Her tears had stopped, though the crystallized ones still adorned her face like diamonds. "You humans," she said, shaking her head, "you are so dramatic." What?" She squeezed his hands, her expression softening into something warm and fond. "Jackson, do you know why I have been so distressed by your absence?" He shook his head. Because in Valerian culture, when we form a deep connection with another being, when we find someone whose mind resonates with our own, whose presence makes the universe seem brighter, we call it Kelshara. Your translation would call it soul recognition. She stepped closer until they were mere inches apart. I have been in Kelshara with you since that first night we talked for hours about the beauty of your sunsets. Jackson's mind reeled. You feel the same way. I have been trying to court you according to human customs, Orla said with a small, embarrassed smile. I read 17 books on human romance. I learned about the significance of flowers and chocolates and something called Netflix and chill, which I am still not entirely certain I understand correctly. Despite everything, Jackson laughed. The sound felt like releasing pressure that had been building for weeks. So all this time, he said slowly, we've both been terrified of the same thing. It would appear so. They stood there, holding hands, the absurdity and beauty of the situation washing over them both. I'm sorry, Jackson said, for avoiding you, for making you think you'd done something wrong. That was cowardly of me. You are not a coward, Orla said firmly. You are cautious, thoughtful. These are qualities I admire. She hesitated. Though perhaps next time you could be cautious and thoughtful while still speaking to me. Deal, Jackson smiled, then grew serious. But Orla, you're a princess. I'm nobody. Your people, the coalition, my own government, there are going to be complications. Then we will face them together. She said it with such certainty, such regal confidence, that Jackson almost believed it could be that simple. Together, he echoed. She reached up with one hand to touch his face, her skin cool and smooth against his. May I try something I read about in one of those human romance books? What's that? Instead of answering, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. Kissing someone with a different facial structure should have been awkward, strange even. But somehow it wasn't. It was perfect, a bridge between their worlds, a promise of what they could build together. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Jackson noticed that Orla's skin had shifted to a brilliant gold, a color he'd never seen on a Valerian before. What does that mean? He asked, gesturing to her altered pigmentation. She smiled, radiant and genuine, joy, pure, unfiltered joy. Outside the viewport, stars streaked past as the Covenant's edge continued its journey through the cosmos. Inside the diplomatic suite, two beings from different worlds held each other, proof that some connections transcended biology, politics, and the vast distances between stars. Jackson had spent weeks running from this moment, convinced that some gaps were too wide to bridge. He had never been happier to be wrong. And